The summer of 2003 in Mardanpur was a furnace. The dust rose like smoke, and the sun beat down without mercy. 17-year-old Zarina was the heart of her home, her hands moving with the speed of a woman twice her age. She gave up school to sew, stitching clothes for pennies to keep her younger siblings in school and their dreams alive. But vulnerability is always noticed. Malik Tajamal, the powerful landlord with cold eyes, began to haunt the village. One afternoon, his car slowed beside her. A cold fear settled into her bones, a fear that wouldn't leave. Soon, she was being watched. Shadows followed her to work, and strange offers began appearing at her door. Zarina felt like a bird in a cage that was slowly getting smaller, the walls closing in from every side. In Mardanpur, the silence was no longer peace. It was a warning. Weeks passed, and the watching continued. For Zarina, normal had become an unrecognizable memory. Every shadow made her jump. Every unfamiliar voice made her freeze. The stars she once loved now felt like cold, watching eyes. Her mother, Ruxana, watched her daughter stare into dark places where no mother wants to look. Then came Ghulam Rasul, a man with a voice like oil sliding over glass, carrying a message from Malik Tajamal. He offered a better job at the estate, more pay, food, clothes, a bribe wrapped in a suggestion of charity. Ruxana declined politely, but Ghulam's eyes changed. He was not used to hearing the word no. That night, the trusted few gathered. Amma Noor, who had survived many storms, broke the silence. Men like Malik Tajamal do not ask twice, she warned. Next time, he will simply take what he wants. Ruxana chose the pain of separation over the fear of what might happen if Zarina stayed. Before the sun rose, Zarina left. A small bag, a bumpy road, and the hope of a fresh start in documentaries. For a few days, relief was real. No white cars, no predators, just the rhythm of laundry and old sewing machines. But normal was a luxury they couldn't afford. On the fifth day, the phone rang. A number unknown. The caller asked just one question. No name, no demand, just the weight of 1,000 threats. Hassan sat outside his house all night with a wooden stick across his lap. He would rather break than let her be taken. The tension became a physical thing, locked gates, whispered warnings. The children kept inside. Zarina knew. She was a thread caught in a web. No matter how far she ran, the web stretched with her. She lay awake, wondering how a life so small could be at the center of so much fear. Distance hadn't made her invisible. The predator was still there, waiting for the storm to break. It was a world that punished the poor for their existence, a world where safety was a myth. The silence of documentaries was no longer peaceful. It was the silence of a house holding its breath. The storm was coming, and this time there was nowhere left to run, to be continued. On the 9th day at documentaries, everything changed. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the heat was a heavy blanket. Even the birds had stopped singing. In a village of footsteps and donkey carts, the roar of a car engine was a warning. Zarina looked out into the glare. Through the curtain, she saw it. A black Jeep. 2 men stepped out in clean, pressed clothes. They didn't belong here. They asked for Hassan, the mechanic. The old man pointed the way, and the hunt moved toward their gate. Nasreen moved quickly. "Run," she whispered. She pushed Zarina through the door and into the vastness of the wheat. She ran. The sharp stalks scratched her skin, and her heart pounded so loudly she feared the whole village could hear it. She reached the neighbor's house and hid in the dark. Minutes felt like hours. She prayed for Hassan and the children. Back at the house, Hassan met them at the gate. He tried to keep his voice steady, but his hands were shaking. They said Malik Tajamal had a message. Hassan stood his ground. "There is no girl here," he told them. They left, but Hassan knew. Men like these don't give up. They come back, and when they do, they come with force. That evening, the decision was made. Zarina was no longer safe. Ruxana wept, her hope breaking over the phone line. Ruxana had gone to the police. They listened with bored eyes. "No proof," they said. "Stop wasting our time." She left feeling smaller than she had ever felt. The world was closing in, and no one was coming to help. Salim had a plan. A factory 200 kilometers away, a hostel, a place where Malik Tajamal couldn't reach. To keep her close was danger. To send her away was loss. Every option felt like a different kind of heartbreak. 2 days later, Zarina stood at the station. Salim gave her the envelope. She boarded the bus without looking back. She watched her world vanish. She carried a fear that had become as familiar as her own shadow. With every kilometer she changed. Not stronger, not weaker, but different. A girl running from the darkness. She arrived late. The station was a storm of strangers. She found a phone and called the only number she had. Jamil was there. "Don't worry," he said. He drove her through the neon haze to a plain, quiet building. The hostel was simple, the room was small, but it was clean, and most importantly, it had a lock. She locked the door and sat in the quiet. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe. Zarina had survived the night, but the shadows of Malik Tajamal are long. The garment factory was a monolithic slab in the city's industrial heart, a symphony of hard work and humming machines. Zarina was no stranger to the grind. Her precision earned her a place among the delicate work, every rupee saved. She found allies in the shadows, friends who understood her silence. But peace was temporary. One evening, a white car near the hostel gate turned her blood to ice. The past had found her. She sat in the dark, knees to her chest, but she refused to break. She would not let the shadow steal her future. With Parveen's help, Zarina mastered a different craft, the alphabet, a new life written in her own hand. Her first letter home brought tears to her mother's eyes, a blurred, wrinkled treasure held every night like gold. Zarina learned that while the past may follow, the future is hers to write. A resilience, rewritten. Almost a year had passed since Zarina left Mardanpur. She had grown in ways she could not have imagined when she first boarded that bus with a heart full of fear. She could now read, write, and even do basic mathematics. Parveen was teaching her to use a computer, a machine that opened an endless world. She was still at the garment factory, but with more education, better jobs were within reach. The future was finally showing a faint light. Then, one afternoon, everything fell apart. The floor manager called her into his office, his manner nervous and his forehead damp with sweat. Men had come asking about her, showing a photograph. They carried a name that even in this distant city carried a terrifying weight. The manager didn't say the name out loud, but Zarina knew. Malik Tajamal had not forgotten. Men like him never forgot. To them, being refused was not just a disappointment. It was an insult, a wound to their pride that could only be healed by conquest. She went straight to Parveen and told her everything. For over an hour, the words poured out of her like water from a broken dam. She spoke of her mother's struggles, the dusty road in Mardanpur, and the white car that had changed her life forever. She told her about the men who came to her village and the police officer who had turned a blind eye to her fear. Parveen listened without surprise. She knew how the world worked for girls like Zarina, and it made her furious every single time. But Parveen didn't just listen. She made phone calls. She contacted advocate Rubina, a lawyer who specialized in the exploitation of women. Rubina asked detailed questions. Then she told Zarina something she had never heard. What was happening to her was a crime. Crimes could be punished no matter how powerful the criminal. Zarina wanted to believe, but her world had only ever known the law of power. Rubina filed a formal complaint. In the city, the police response was different. An officer took the case seriously and opened an investigation. Zarina moved to a shelter for protection. It was a simple building, but it was run by women who understood what it meant to be hunted. At night, they shared pieces of their lives like fragments of a broken mirror. In those shared stories, they found the power to survive. Then came Sadia, a journalist. She began making discreet inquiries in Mardanpur, digging where others had chosen to look away. What she found was disturbing. Zarina was not the first girl Malik Tajamal had targeted. There were many others. Some had been silenced with money, some with threats, and some had simply disappeared. Their stories were hidden behind walls of fear. But for the first time, those walls of fear and shame were beginning to crack. The truth was finally finding its way out. Zarina's stand was no longer just about her own survival. It was a fight for every girl the world had chosen to forget. The The light at the end of the tunnel was no longer faint. It was becoming a beacon. The shelter became Zarina's new world. For 2 months, her life was a repetitive cycle of factory work and shadowed hallways. She took longer routes to avoid the men watching her. Parveen arranged for Asma, a young law student, to accompany her each day. Asma was idealistic, with a fire in her eyes that reminded Zarina of dreams the world had tried to crush. They became close friends. Zarina listened as Asma spoke the language of resistance, courage, and hope. One evening, Sadia the journalist returned. She had uncovered a tapestry of suffering that was both valuable and dangerous. She found Farzana, whose home was burned to the ground for refusing a powerful man's advances. No one was ever charged. Then there was Rabia, a young widow lured by lies and assaulted. When she sought justice, the police told her to be silent. These stories filled Zarina with a cold fury. Malik Tajamal was still free, driving his white car through villages where people bowed their heads. That night, Zarina made a decision. She would not run anymore. She would speak for Farzana, Rabia, and every silenced woman. Rubina, the lawyer, worked with Sadia to build a case. They wove the testimonies into a pattern of behavior impossible to ignore. Sadia's article was published on a Sunday morning. By Monday, it was the only thing the country was talking about. Social media exploded. Politicians who once protected Tajamal suddenly distanced themselves, issuing hollow statements about justice. The pressure became enormous. Warrants were issued, and Tajamal's men, including Ghulam Rasul, were finally cornered. But Malik Tajamal was a different kind of opponent. He hired the country's most expensive lawyers to launch a counter-narrative. He accused Zarina of a political conspiracy. His lawyers attacked the witnesses' credibility, turning the legal battle into a brutal war. The toll was heavy. Threatening calls at midnight, strangers visiting Farzana's family. Rabia suffered a breakdown and was hospitalized. Despite the fear, Zarina refused to back down. She gave her statements clearly. She did not hesitate. She did not tremble. She looked at the cameras gathered outside the court. The world saw a woman who appeared calm and composed, but inside she was terrified. Every night, she would lock herself in the bathroom and cry until her body ached. She pressed a towel against her face so no one could hear her. She had learned long ago that the world did not care about tears. It only respected strength. Then she would wash her face, straighten her back, and walk out as if nothing had happened. She was a witness now. She stood for those who could no longer speak. A single thread in a tapestry that was finally being rewoven. Zarina's story was no longer just hers. It was the beginning of a reckoning that would echo across every village and street. Winter descended upon the region, bringing with it a trial that the newspapers claimed would define a generation. The courtroom was small and crowded, heavy with the scent of damp wool and the weight of historic consequence. Zarina sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, a picture of stillness while a storm raged within. Beside her sat Rubina, translating the complicated language of the law into simple truths she could hold on to. Across the room, Malik Tajamal sat in an expensive suit, the portrait of a man who believed he was above the law. His lawyers flanked him like guards. He didn't need to look at Zarina. He had paid men to do his fighting for him. Presiding was Justice Anwar, a woman with a reputation for being fair, demanding, and utterly without patience for theatrics. She denied every motion to dismiss with short, sharp rulings that left no room for Tajamal's influence to take root. When it came time for Zarina to testify, the courtroom fell into a silence so deep you could hear the scratching of a pen. She began at the beginning. The dusty road in Mardanpur and the white car that slowed beside her. She spoke clearly, recounting the fear, her mother's cries, and the year she spent hiding from men who thought they owned her. She spoke for the others too, for Farzana, whose home was burned, and for Rabia, who had nearly lost her life to despair. Then came the cross-examination. A lead lawyer with a voice like silk, designed to make even the most outrageous claims sound reasonable. He questioned her education, her motives. He suggested her story was a fabrication, a play for money or fame. He made her feel as if she were the one on trial, questioning why she had no physical evidence of his harassment. But Zarina did not waver. She had a quiet strength that no training could provide, a strength born of endurance. When he tried to confuse her, she asked for simplicity. When he accused her of lying, she told him she had nothing to gain, Then, the lawyer made a fatal mistake. Desperate to discredit her, he shouted that if her story were true, she would have scars to show for it. The courtroom held its breath. Zarina looked at Justice Anwar, then slowly, she stood up from the witness stand. Without a word, she reached for her shirt. The lawyer rushed forward to stop her, and in the confrontation, the fabric tore. And that is when everyone saw it, a jagged scar that told a story more powerful than any words could ever convey. The courtroom gasped. The evidence wasn't in a file or a folder, it was written on her skin. And Malik Tajamal, for the first time, lowered his eyes and looked at the floor. The silence was absolute. The scar on Zarina's abdomen was more than a wound. It was a map of a life defined by poverty and fear. Long before Malik Tajamal, a 12-year-old Zarina fell ill. Her mother, penniless and desperate, was forced to trust a village quack. The surgery was a disaster, performed in a filthy room with no anesthesia. Zarina's screams faded only when she lost consciousness. She woke to a crudely stitched wound that would later infect and fester. She survived, but the scar remained, a permanent reminder of her station. It was a reminder that in this world, even staying alive has a price for the poor, one that must be paid in pain. Years later, the scar had another chapter. Fleeing Tajamal's men through the fields of Dak Kurd, Zarina fell. A jagged piece of metal tore through her clothes, reopening the old trauma and adding a new layer of disfigurement. Fear kept her from a hospital. The wound healed poorly in hiding, leaving the mark even more prominent for the world to eventually see. This was the evidence the courtroom witnessed, a history of fear that no amount of cross-examination could dispute. The image spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed, and television screens flickered with the story of the girl and the powerful man. Social media flooded with messages of support. The story became a symbol of everything broken in a system that protected the powerful. Inside the court, Tajamal's lawyers fought to strike the record, but Justice Anwar was unmoved. She saw the truth in the flesh. Their aggressive tactics had backfired spectacularly, turning a moment meant to discredit Zarina into her most powerful evidence. Rubina called Amanur, who traveled from Mardanpur despite her age, to testify about the changes she saw in Zarina. She called Farzana, who described the night her home was burned. Each witness added a layer to the picture of a monster. A picture emerged of a man who used his wealth to terrorize, but the most surprising blow was yet to come. His former driver, Bashir, stepped forward. After 15 years of silence, his conscience had finally overwhelmed his fear. Bashir spoke in a low, shaking voice. He described the trips, the young women brought to the estate, and the silence bought with payments. He exposed a system of corruption so deep it seemed untouchable. And yet there he was, challenging it one word at a time. Malik Tajamal stared at him with eyes that could burn through steel. But Bashir did not look back. He kept his eyes on the judge. Bashir had been fired for trying to warn a victim. The truth was far more extensive than anyone had initially imagined. The web of abuse was unraveling. The truth, long buried by power, was finally coming home. To be continued. The trial stretched over months. It was exhausting for Zarina, who attended every hearing with a focus that never wavered. When she felt like giving up, she thought of her mother's wave, a gesture holding more love and pain than words could express. She stayed. Then came Colonel Tariq Mahmoud, a retired officer of integrity. He followed her story and chose to use his influence for justice. After listening to her, he spoke words she didn't expect. He said he was ashamed that his country could treat its daughters this way. The turning point was a photograph of Zarina's scar. It showed the clinical detail of years of hunting, scarring, and silence. The colonel turned away, unable to flinch from the truth. It was a silence that spoke louder than any testimony ever could. The verdict came on a Friday. The courtroom was packed, a sea of faces demanding justice for a story 2 years in the making. Zarina sat still, an anchor in a room of mounting tension. Beside her, her family clutched prayer beads in silent hope. Justice Anwar spoke the words that changed everything. Malik Tajamal was found guilty on multiple charges. 14 years in prison. The room erupted. Zarina remained still until she felt her mother's hand. 2 women standing together in a moment no one could take away. Outside, she spoke for every woman told her voice didn't matter. She said it only takes a few who refuse to look away to change everything. It wasn't a fairy tale, but a crack had appeared in the wall of silence. Through that crack, light was beginning to pour in. Zarina proved that the most powerful force in the world is the simple, stubborn refusal of one human being to be broken.